afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing today? I gotta follow Pete and Tom. Man, that's just a tough one, especially with a subject like this, materials, right? I mean, of all the awesome stuff that EAM does, I'm gonna talk to you about materials, which is a fairly mundane topic, right? It's not the most exciting thing that happens in EAM, but it can be very important to you from a business perspective, and it can save you a lot of money, which is always important to everybody, right? So first off, welcome. I'm Phil Bragg. I'm a pre-sales manager here at Hexagon EAM. And like I said, the topic is why work and inventory should work together. Now, I'm pretty sure since you all are in here, you probably know why. Otherwise, you wouldn't be attending this. So we're going to talk a little bit about the why. But we're also going to spend some time talking about the how and also kind of the what else can it help me do, right? Obviously, we want our work and inventory to work together, but once you get those things working together, there's other values that you can drive out of the system once you get to that point, okay? So we'll do this. Okay, I put this presentation together the day after the Super Bowl. So the only thing I had on my mind was football and how long it's gonna be until football season starts again. So I was like, I'm gonna do a football analogy, okay? So we're gonna start off, we're gonna talk a little bit about the why. Then we're gonna start with the basics, the blocking and tackling of getting this all to work within EAM, right? And that kind of lays the foundation of it. But once we get done with that, we're gonna say, okay, well then what next? Okay, we'll do some run plays, right? You know, once we got our blocking and tackling down, we'll do some run plays. Boom, get our offense working. And then we'll say, hey, now it's time to take it to the next level. We'll get into some of those pass plays, some of that more advanced, cool stuff that we can do once we start collecting all this data, okay? And then finally, I'll just wrap it with my opinion of how you can take your team to the Super Bowl, all right, with materials. So before I begin though, I want to talk or tell you guys a little story about a time when I fumbled the ball on materials, okay? And maybe you can relate to this story. So we were going out for this very important thing, very important event we had to do, and one of our pieces of equipment broke down. A very important piece of equipment. It's pretty stressful, right? So I'm like, but it's okay. So I talked to my supply guy, my MRO warehouseman, and not a problem. We have a part available. So great, go get the part, get the crews in here, we can get this fixed really quick. We should not have an issue. So, but the stress level is going up because time's getting short. So, goes to the back in the warehouse, comes back out, he's like, hate to tell you this, but it's not there. I'm like, what is not there? It says right here on inventory, we got to have it in there. It's not in there. Does it ever happen to anybody? So I'm like, great. So I'm like, well, this is miracle time. You need to start working some miracles. I don't care what it costs. We need this thing. So making some phone calls, call the manufacturer part, find one at one of the distributors, FedEx it overnight in. If it gets here first thing in the morning, we have everybody on standby. We should probably be able to get this thing up and running. Boom. Thank goodness it all worked out. Part got there, we got it fixed, boom, on the road. But it cost me a lot of money to get that thing FedExed overnight for a part that was not that expensive. So a couple weeks later, I'm sitting there telling this story to my friend who also has a similar position, another part of the organization. And he's like, why didn't you just call me? I have like 4 of those sitting on the shelf right now. And I'm like, are you kidding me? For all that we went through, we could have just picked up a phone call, but we had no visibility. Okay, that was the problem. Not only were our counts off and our warehouse wrong, but we had no visibility across the organization. So even though the parts were right there and we could have got them for almost nothing, instead we had to jump through all these hoops, pay all this money to get this part in to keep things running. Have you guys ever experienced anything like that? Yeah, it's painful, all right? So hopefully if we get everything running right in EAM, we can prevent these kind of fumbles and make our system run smooth. Okay, so why? Again, you wouldn't be in here, I don't think, if you didn't know why you need to get this to work, right? There's a lot of different reasons: reducing downtime, optimizing our technician efficiency, right? There's nothing more frustrating as a technician to go out there to do your work and the parts are not available. Tracking costs, right? If you don't have your parts matching up with your work in EAM, there's no way for you to track costs, right? Your maintenance budget is basically going into a black hole, and there's no way you can really improve that if you don't know exactly where your costs are going, all right? That fourth one, understanding life cycle costs, again, super important. If you're trying to make a decision on what you want to do with this asset, if you don't have any part cost information over history, there's really no way, other than your gut feeling, that you can make a decision on whether it makes fiscal sense to refurbish or replace a particular asset. Then there's risk, all right? So minimizing risk. Obviously, as professional maintainers, one of our main objectives is to reduce the risk of our operations. And if we are not managing our material correctly, that induces risk into the process, right? So we're always thinking about how can we reduce that risk. So when you start getting all that, then you start to kind of look at these last bigger pictures, right? Like optimizing your inventory levels, okay? There's no business out there in the world that is not concerned with inventory levels. So even though your job is to maintain risk, you're also balancing that against the inventory costs that you're holding, right? So that's a challenge. If you don't have the data to support your decisions, there's no way you can really optimize that. And then finally, there's optimizing purchasing. This is the one that is like, I call it the golden goose, right? If you are starting collecting data and you can see across your organization, now you can really change the game on your purchasing. Because I guarantee if you're working at an enterprise level, you're representing one part of your organization. There's parts you're using that are being used across your organization, same parts, same, and you all are paying higher than you need to because you don't have the data available to give to your purchasers to start making them leveraging the buying power of your organization against your vendors, right? But if you can collect that data, then you can now really take it up to the next level and start thinking from a purchasing perspective, not just you and your little piece of the maintenance pie, but your entire organization's maintenance budget, okay? Now, when I break down a problem, I like to think about it from the most simplest terms available, okay? And I always start from the simple principles and then I work out in detail. So when I start thinking about this problem, it really comes down to this simple to understand, but very complex to execute problem, right? And I think that's pretty much how most of the hard things in life are, right? They're easy to understand, but they're very hard to execute in real life because you're balancing two things that are diametrically opposed. On the one hand, you have your parts inventory, right? Honestly, I looked at this last night. I think you could even make this simpler. But let's just say parts inventory. But parts inventory is really just a substitute for risk, right? So as a maintainer, if you want to minimize your risk, the easiest way to do that would just to have a gigantic warehouse sitting right here with 10 versions of everything that you ever want, so that no matter what happens on any given day, you can just walk over there and pull your parts out, right? That would be perfect, but that's just not gonna happen, right? Because on the other side, you have this other thing, which I'm calling holding costs, but you could probably just replace with a dollar sign, right? It's money. It's your holding cost, it's your inventory purchasing costs, it's your warehousing costs. All the costs involved and associated with maintaining that warehouse are balanced on the other side. So the question is, how do you balance these things in the real world, right? Because you want to, on the one hand, essentially maximize or minimize your risk balanced against the budget that you have. And we all know that that budget is going down, right? It's going down, but they want you to have at least the equivalent risk or even reduce risk. And the only way you can make that balance work in the real world is with data, okay, to help you make those decisions. Okay, so let's start with the basics, blocking and tackling. Now again, I said this is simple because these are really simple concepts to put up here on a one-line sentence, okay? Very easy to type out. Very, very difficult to execute in the real world, right? Because this is a big problem that you're dealing with. The first one is you gotta understand what you need and where is it used, okay? Pretty simple thing, except you have thousands of assets and they have thousands of different parts from different manufacturers that change all the time. So it's a simple to understand, hard to do, but we'll talk about how we can do that in EAM. The second thing is you have to now start registering your part demand and activating auto requisition, okay? And I chose my words there very carefully. So there's a difference between usage and demand, okay? Usage is when you apply the part in the real world on the maintenance activity that you're conducting, okay? That is important, but that's not nearly as critical as demand. Demand is when you provide that signal to the system, to EAM, so that you can leverage the tools of auto requisitioning to make sure you get the right part at the right time. So essentially, you're moving the problem forward in time. So you're not identifying a part when you need it on the asset, you're identifying it in the planning phase early on. And that's done through different methods within EAM that we'll talk about. And then finally, you got to link that to purchasing, right? At the end of the day, somebody has to actually buy this thing. So how can we use EAM? EAM is like the linkage between work and purchasing. So making sure that linkage works all the way through and back so that you get the part when you need it, okay? So let's break these down a little bit. Okay, first off, parts. Okay, I'm gonna jump here into the parts screen and just show you some things within the system that you need to be aware of as you're setting this up in the system so that you can achieve these goals. And then what's it's associated to. Now, obviously, the best way to do this would be, hey, I'm gonna take every piece of equipment that I have, open up the parts catalog that the manufacturer's given me, put in and associate every part with each piece of equipment. That does not seem reasonable to me. If that seems reasonable to you, you have a lot more people working for you, okay, than I ever did. But it's not really that reasonable, okay? But there's some ways EAM can help that as well. We have a thing in there called install parameter called auto part. So basically, every time you use a part on a work order, it's now going to associate with that asset so that over time, you can build up your bill of material on different pieces of equipment within the system. So there's ways that you can accelerate that process. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a close look at the work. I'm just showing you the part screen. I'm sure everybody's seen the part screen. If you're not using the part screen right now, you know, because you haven't started putting parts in your EAM system, this is the parts screen. I just want to point out a couple tabs we're going to look at because they're really important when you're setting up the system to think through. So this is the stores tab, obviously. Now, the key here, this is the asset record. We're going to look at stores, suppliers, substitutes, and where used. So obviously, this is just like any other screen. I'm not going to get too crazy on this. But if we break down the stores, this is where you're breaking down those different locations where your parts are stored within your organization. So again, this seems like a very simple thing, but just knowing within your organization where parts are being held within your organization will allow you to do things like storage or transfer. And again, just when other people within your organization understand the complexity of the problem and can see it out there, now they can start thinking about how can we work together as a team to solve this problem. So now you're not just looking at what am I storing right here, but I'm being able to see it across my organization. The other thing is, and one of the most critical things is what we call the stocking method. I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. But again, this is the tool within the system that's going to allow us to start taking advantage of that auto requisitioning capability that's within EAM. So we really have to think about how it is that we want to control this from a part-by-part basis within EAM. Because not every part's the same, right? You have different types of parts, different nature of different parts, so you're going to use different stocking methods within the system. Okay, the next one is our suppliers. So again, I just point this out because this preferred, you can see up here we've selected this preferred supplier, and because we've done requisitions in the past from this supplier, the system is automatically calculating our price and our lead time. So again, this is, again, just like everything in EAM, it's these little pieces of data that you have to start generating and gathering up that's going to help you make these big changes to your system. So getting them right and starting collecting that data is going to be the key to unlocking all this capability. But in this particular case, it's that preferred supplier, that lead time, and those price. That's all going to drive your purchasing and your requisitioning process. Okay, next is substitutes. Okay, so a lot of people don't use this in EAM, but again, this can be really important if your lead time gets too long or if your supplier becomes available, that you've already pre-identified substitutes from the system so that it's easier for your purchasing people to be proactive in acquiring a part, right? You don't have to have this dance that goes back and forth between, hey, I can't find it here, they don't have it over there. You can eliminate all that if you pre-plan ahead and identify those substitutes within the system. And then where used, this is just going to show you where these parts have been associated throughout the system to the particular different assets in EAM, okay? Now I'm just going to quickly jump over to the asset record. So the asset record, again, has the parts associated, all right? So this is just, again, this is your bill of material. This might be obvious if you've already done this in your system, but for some people, this is not intuitively obvious, right? You build the parts within EAM first, and then you associate them to the particular pieces of assets here in the parts associated tab, okay? Now let's talk just a little bit about these different reorder methods and what it can mean to you in the system. So there's the min-max, we got reorder level and on demand, okay? So again, those are just different methods that the system's gonna use to create that auto requisition. So obviously min max, it's going to get to a minimum value, and then it's going to order whatever the order quantity is to get you back up to the max volume. A reorder level is just going to, once you get that reorder level, it's going to look at what you have as your economic order quantity, what the system is defined, or the system is defined as the order quantity, and it's going to order that amount. And then for a lot of parts, they're just going to be on demand, right? You don't want to them without some sort of additional interaction, either because they're very low volume parts or they're very expensive parts or something like that. So you don't want to activate auto requisition. But auto requisition is going to be the part that really makes the system hum, okay? And that's why I want to talk and reinforce that part about part demand, okay? So the system cannot requisition something until a demand has been placed on it, okay? And so again, the most obvious demand, and what I see a lot of customers doing, is just using that demand at the issuance point, right? When they issue to the work order at the time of the maintenance activity. But that's actually not the best time to apply it, because that's not gonna help you create those requisitions prior to needing the part, right? So there's other tools in there called reserving, and also the other concept is allocating part. So reserving parts is basically when you release a work order, it's gonna place a demand on the system at that point, and then if you meet one of those criteria for requisition, then it's gonna auto-requisition it, okay? So let me give you an example. Say you're dropping your PM work orders. You're dropping 30 a month, maybe you have a fan belt in there, okay? So your current inventory quantity could be something, say 15. Now, if you wait until the time of the maintenance action, then you're gonna get 15 of them done, and then you're gonna be like, oh, then you're gonna place that 16th part on demand, and then it's gonna put the requisition in. But if you reserve that part, and when you release the work order, at that point you put the demand on the system's gonna look out, it's gonna say, hey, you only got 15, you need 30, so it's gonna order, that's gonna drive the requisition process, and now you're starting that requisition now earlier in the planning process rather than during the maintenance process, okay? So now you're accelerating that parts process and really moving it up. So now by the time, depending on your lead times, hopefully with something like a fan belt, it shouldn't be that long, right? Now, with those lead times, now when it's time to go to maintenance, you actually have 30 and 15, okay? And then there's direct requisition. Again, to me, that's like the choice of last resort, right? That's when everything doesn't work, you do direct requisition, all right? But we should try to minimize it as best we can. Okay, so that's, so we know we know how to make the requisition system work for us. Now we have to link it to our purchasing system. And so again, I just like simple diagrams. We can think of the materials process in EAM as the linkage between our work and our purchasing, right? Now, for most people, the purchasing a vast majority or a lot of your purchasing process takes place outside of EAM. So that's where the beauty of EAM and our integration layer that Pete just talked about with DataBridge Pro we can use to integrate with our purchasing system or our ERP system or our financial system, right? However you do it within your organization. And we see it from our perspective a lot of different ways. I would say this is kind of like the most common model that we see. So this is what I would call a financial system centric model, where the vast majority of your transactions are taking place within the financial system. Really what EAM is doing is really, again, registering that demand for the parts that we need, and then on the back end, keeping track of the inventories within our warehouse. But pretty much, the purchase orders, all the receipts and everything is all taking place within our financial system. Again, that's what we see is very common, but not exclusively. We can see kind of on the flip side is what we would call like an EAM-centric model, right? Where you're doing a lot of those transactions within EAM, and all you really do is sending your costing information over to your financial system so that they can pay for the purchase orders, right? So either model, there's nothing wrong with either model. EAMs can support either model. Like I said, the beauty of DataBridge Pro is it gives you a really nice integration layer to be able to do that, okay? Okay, so now we got the basics. We got our parts identified. We know what they're on. We've built a system within there to identify demand and activate our purchasing process, and we've integrated with our purchasing system, okay? So now we're ready to rock and roll. We're ready to hit the field, right? So we're gonna start out with some basic plays, right? So once we get all this stuff working, then what can we do? What can EAM do for us, right? There's above and beyond just that. Now I will tell you that if you can get that part running and running smooth, that's pretty good, okay? You're doing pretty good, but there's more, right? There's more we can do. So what can we do? So there's a couple different things within EAM. One is the electronics parts catalog, okay? So if you've not seen this, I'll show you a picture of what it would look like. But this now removes that step of having to search for the parts, right? A technician can go to a visual depiction of the equipment they're working on and actually figure out specifically what part it is based off this electronics parts catalog, okay? So now we're ramping it up a level, right? Store-to-store transfers, again, that seems so simple, but it can be very, very complex in organizations. EAM makes that really, really easy. So you can do really easy direct store-to-store transfers. You can even have certain stores requisitioning from other stores, right? So you might have like a main warehouse, and then you may have adjacent warehouses that draw their requisitions from the main warehouse. So there's a lot of different ways you can set up EAM to support how your organization wants to run their parts. Repairable spares, again, this is where I start to see customers taking their game to the next level, right? So now we've kind of, the model we talked about initially is kind of that repair part, like you're just repairing it. But a lot of organizations have repairable spares, right? And the challenge of being able to identify those repairable spares, to be able to track them throughout the repair process, whether that's internal to your own maintenance shop or externally to a contractor, to be able to bring those back, keep them in the warehouse, and then apply them on the next application. You can manage that entire process within EAM. You can even take it to the next level, part condition, okay? So that's one thing, just managing that, let's just say it's a motor, it burns out, we're gonna take it, we're gonna send it out for rebuild, we're gonna bring it back, put it on the shelf, but now I can start tracking that part. How many times has it been repaired? Maybe it's on its second repair, its third repair. I can start tracking that part through its entire life cycle using our parts condition. So now as a maintainer, when I'm looking to replace this part, not only can I see what I have available, but I can look at my inventory, and I can make a decision, like, do I want to put a brand new pump in there? Do I want to take one that's on its second rebuild? And I can make those really intelligent decisions about what I want to do. We can also do part warranties, okay? Again, I always tell people warranties in EAM is the quickest way to get return on investment. Most people are tracking them. Most people, and the other thing is a lot of people think of warranties in terms of assets, but there's actually, you can do warranties on parts as well. So just imagine all those parts that break and you just like, throw them away. You're just throwing value away, right? Because a lot of them are under warranty. If you had a system to track that and maintain that within EAM, you can get that money. And it's all built right then there out of the box in EAM. And then the other one is part inspections, okay? So a lot of organizations have the requirement to inspect parts before they put them in the warehouse. So again, do you have a way to do that systematically with an EAM? Yeah, you do. And you can track and audit it and understand the full life cycle, if you will, of that part. Okay, so that's the intermediate level. Now this is just a quick view of what the electronics parts catalog looks like. So again, this is integration with OpenCAD. So you bring that parts catalog in there, you associate the parts with the diagrams, and now as a technician, there's no guesswork, right? You go to the diagram, you pick the part you want, and you have confidence that you're ordering the part that you need. Pretty amazing capability. All right, so now we're ready to really get things going, okay? So taking it up to the advanced level. So if we got all these things working, we got all of our parts in there, we're doing our requisitions, everything's running great, and you're starting to say, well, what's the next level? What else can we do? How can we get more value? Well, there's other tools within EAM you can do that. Okay, so here's just a couple examples of some of my favorite things within EAM that you can do with from a materials perspective. Okay, first one is EOQ calculations. Okay, so the second one is ABC analysis, and then what I like to call forecast reporting. Okay, so EOQ calculations, I'll show you what it looks like here. So once we start doing all this, right, we're collecting all this data and information, now we can start asking the EAM, like, okay, am I really ordering the right number? Like, I always just order 10, but is 10 the best number? Maybe it's 12, maybe it's 4, I don't know. Is it, if you have 10,000 parts in your inventory, would it be a bit of a challenge to figure all that out? Yeah, it would, right? But EAM has a tool built in there where you can just ask the system, hey, calculate my economic order quantity. And you can see in this particular example, this current order quantity, that's my current order quantity, and then the calculate date runs through the calculation, and then it gives you a recommended new order quantity, okay? So again, now this is how you're really getting that inventory optimization piece, right? So we put a number, and this is not uncommon. We're gonna order 110, 20, 10, right? We're starting off, we don't really know, but now we've got the data to support a decision. Now we're gonna change our EOQ quantities. And now all we gotta do is select the ones we wanna change, hit the button, and the system will automatically update your EOQs. So just thinking from a perspective of how do I get the most value out of my maintenance budget, this is a great tool to help you do that, okay? The second tool is this ABC calculator. So I'm sure if you're in here, you're at least familiar with the ABC concept within material management, right? This is dividing up your parts in your inventory into different classes. And by dividing them in these classes, it helps you to do better data analysis, right? So not every part is created equal. There's different, out of 10,000 parts, there's probably, in most organizations, 10% of those parts that aren't even being used, right? Probably never will be used. So paying a lot of attention to them is just a waste of time and resources, right? But then there's the top there's the ones at the top that are your most valuable ones, and you want to be able to focus your time and resources on those, because any improvements or efficiencies made there are going to be real improvements and efficiencies in organizations, right? That's the concept behind ABC analysis. So there's a couple different models the system uses in there. You can select depending on what you and your financial people think is the most appropriate, and then you can tell the system, hey, break it down in ABC, and then again, that will help you add these different categories to your parts. And then you can reevaluate them over time. Maybe every year you sit down with your finance team and you reevaluate what your ABC model looks like and adjust your parts. So now, if I'm talking to my purchaser, I say, I want you to focus, let's figure out in these A models, like where we can really build efficiencies, because this is where we're using the most parts, or the parts are costing us the most money, right? We can focus now on where we're gonna get the biggest bang for our buck, okay? The third one is what I like to call forecasting reports. So this is just one example. We typically think about reports as looking back in time, like what did we do last year? What were our numbers last quarter? We're thinking of it as historical data being presented to us. But in EAM, I like to think of it being as, rather than backwards looking data, is decision support information, right? How do I get the system to give me the information I need to make a decision, okay? So I took a typical example of the type of thing that you're probably asked. How much maintenance budget do you need next year, right? That's a very common question, right? How do you guys solve that? Can somebody tell me, like, how do you solve that when you get asked? So somebody run an MR, what's that? Yeah, what's that? Say it again. Okay, take what you did last year, right, and multiply it by whatever production increase they're projecting, right? That's pretty good. Maybe add 10% just to be safe, right? Okay, that's typically what you get, right? So it's some sort of parametric formula that you developed over the years, whatever that might be. Mine was always like, take whatever I did last year, add 10%, hope I get it, right? But we can do a lot better than that. We can do a lot better than that with EAM. So this is an example report we created. And what we did is let's look at all of our PMs that we have to do over the next year, okay? And then let's look at all the parts, because we've got all this set up, right? We know what our PMs are. We know what our parts are required on those PMs. We have great costing data because we're doing requisitions on a day-to-day basis. And now we can tell the system, tell me in 2025 how much the parts are gonna cost me to do our preventive maintenance, right? And so you can see right here in this example, it's $77,451.13, right? So just imagine going to a budgeting meeting with that number, right? Who's gonna say no to that, right? If you hand that report and say, this is what I'm telling you I need for 2025 to do my PM maintenance budget, they have two choices. They can either give you the money or they can tell you stop doing PMs, in which case you can say, okay, which PMs do you want me to, right? So this is a very empowering type of data that you can bring to the discussion rather than saying, hey, I took my budget, I multiplied it by increase, So a very, very powerful tool. Okay, So how do we get to the Super Bowl, right? That's where you all want to be here. You wouldn't be here if you didn't want to take your team to the Super Bowl. So how do we do that, all right? So this is just some pointers, okay? First off, you got to have a plan, right? So I always tell people when people say, what should I do in EAM? Before I answer anything, I always say, build a plan, okay? Because if you've ever worked in EAM, you know that if you don't properly set up the conditions prior to entering your data, you're not going to get to where you want to be, right? So you really have to think through the entire process first before you start taking any action in EAM. That's my number one recommendation, no matter what you do in EAM. Okay. The second thing is, hey, maybe you call in an expert, right? If you've never done this before, this is new to your organization. This might be a good idea to bring in an expert. You know, we've got all these great implementing partners over here that would love nothing more to come down and help you get your parts squared away. And these people know what they're doing. So maybe in this particular case would be a really good idea to go talk to some of these folks before you commence on your journey. I'm not saying you have to use them, but you should consider it, okay? Because parts, as we saw, it's very data intensive. There's a lot of things that have to be working properly to get it all working right, okay? But if you want to go on your own, okay, that's cool too. So I always say start with the install parameters and org options. Okay, I went through and just looked. There's 46 install parameters and 22 organization operations just in materials. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, that means two things. One, that means there's a lot of flexibility in the system to make it do what you want to do. Every organization is different. You have different rules, different ways you do business. There's a lot of install parameters. But that also gives me, what is that? 68 ways I can screw it up, right? So that also means that if you don't do all those install parameters correctly, then the system's not going to respond in the way that you're expecting it to do. So it's very, very important in anything in EM, but particularly around a topic like this, you make sure you clearly understand how you're setting the system up before you begin, okay? And then get purchasing on board. Again, this is a team sport, right? So you got to make sure you get purchasing on board early, understand what their policy is on purchasing. Because I promise you, whatever their policy is on purchasing is the one you're going to follow. It's not going to be the one you want, it's going to be the one they want. So make sure you involve them early, you understand what their policies and procedures are, so that as you start thinking about those integrations and how you're going to do it, that you align with your business, your organization's business practices, okay? Yeah, import utility is your friend, right? So I'm sure whether you've got a lot of this data in different places, different locations, the quickest and easiest way to get into EAM is using that import utility. So, that's a great way to get going. And then I always say take small steps, right? So putting material into EAM is an owner's task if you haven't started, right? Again, you could have 10,000 parts. That's not out of the realm of scope for a lot of companies. So how do you get there, right? And I just say take small bits, right? Might seem arduous, but what I put in there, if you put 10 parts in a day, that's 2,600 parts a year. That's not bad. A couple years you have it all in there, right? Piece of cake, right? All right. And that's really it. Well, that's what I got. What questions do I have? The light is really bright. Who's got a question? So the question is, if you're setting up new equipment, you already have a parts list. Is it a one-time thing, or are you going to be doing a lot? Okay. Then I would use the equipment generator, right? Just set up a profile one time, and then you can use it as many times as you want. That's probably easy. Oh, it's equipment you already have. So the scenario is you've got a same piece of equipment, you've already got it built in there, and you want to move that parts list to it? Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I think there's several ways you could approach that. I mean, I'm thinking probably using the export and import utility might be the easy way to do it. Probably the easiest way. If you have IT doing it? Oh. Oh, okay, okay. Wow. See, there you go. He just way smarter than me. Yeah, it sounds great. Hmm. I like his idea. Yeah, say that. Can you repeat what you did there? Okay, that's great. I've never heard that before. That's great. Oh, okay. Right, right, right. Mm. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, that's a bit of a problem because that's what allocation is for, right? But because you can only allocate a part that you have, not one that's on order, that's a great question. Because my thought process was you're going to have to put a step in there where the maintenance planner allocates that part, right? But mm, mm. Let me follow up with me afterwards. I want to try something because I'm wondering if you could allocate the part prior to its receipt. Can you do? Have you tried that? Right. Well, it would be to that work order, so it can only be issued to that work order. But my concern is, I think that you can't allocate it until it's been receipted into inventory. In other words, you can't allocate. But I'm not 100% sure on that. I have to look that up. Right. Okay. Yeah, 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 yeah. What was the response when you put it in as an idea? I don't know. Is somebody from development here that works on materials? Yeah, yeah. All right. Any other questions?
How much activity do you have to have before the EOQ becomes relevant, and how often would you run that?
So the amount of data obviously is just going to depend on the quality of the recommendation, right? If you're not ordering a part very often, it's not going to have enough data to give you a better calculation. But what I would say is probably annually, you want to evaluate that annually. You know, depending, I mean, there's probably parts, if you're ordering, again, I don't know the situation we're in, but, you know, if you're ordering $1 million worth of parts a week, then you might want to run this thing quarterly, you know, or monthly. But, you know, it just depends on the amount of activity that you have. And again, if it doesn't have a recommendation, it's not going to give you it's just going to say don't change it. It's only going to give you a recommendation on the parts that you have sufficient data to support an update. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for coming out. Have a good rest of your conference.